This is the Idea Time Show with Dr. Joe North, helping facilitators expand their creativity, confidence and impact through the power of innovation in action. Gain confidence as a facilitator, confidence with the technology, and confidence with your content and event design. Tune in every week for practical tips, strategies and interviews that will accelerate your personal and business success. And now, here's your host, Dr. Joe North.
Wow, what a delight it is to have Paul Sloane on today's show. I absolutely loved our conversation on lateral thinking, creativity, and workplace innovation. Paul is a 20 times published author. He's an international speaker and facilitator. And our conversation covers so much ground, from how to break free from conformity and groupthink through to what leaders can do in terms of asking questions, their behaviours, their input to build more creative teams and get better organisational performance. And Paul also shared some of his favourite brainstorming activities to get better results from idea generation sessions and a lot more besides. I really hope that you enjoy this episode. I'm sure you will. Paul, welcome to the podcast. I'm an absolute fan, as you know, and I'm so pleased to have you here. And
I'm delighted to be with you, Joe.
Thank you. I can't wait for our conversation and where I'd love to start is you are a lateral thinker, you're a creative, you're an innovator, you're a speaker, you're an author. You've written 20 books that have all been published, in the traditional sense as well by...
Yes.
Yeah, proven publishers. So how did you get to do what you're doing, and what does a typical day look like for you, if there is such a thing?
Well, I had a career in high tech. I was in sales and marketing. I was in sales with IBM, then I was a marketing director for a database company, and I was the CEO of a software company. And along the way, I was very interested in lateral thinking puzzles, which are strange situations where you get a little bit of information and you have to ask a lot of questions. And I wrote a book called Lateral Thinking Puzzlers way back in 1990, and it went on to become a bestseller and has been reprinted many times. Then I got interested in how you'd use the same techniques in solving the puzzles in business to solve business problems. And I found some common ground, and it positioned me differently from many other management speakers who came at it from a theoretical or academic point of view. Mine was very much a solving business problems as a puzzle, and how you could use the same techniques of deliberately coming at the problem from different directions, challenging assumptions, coming up with weird combinations, things like that, to solve business problems. And that got me into a mode where I was running workshops for major clients all around the world and writing the books. And that all went very, very well right up until COVID. And once COVID struck, then nobody was having conferences anymore. They didn't want conference speakers. They didn't want live workshops. So I had the occasional business over Zoom. So I had to reinvent myself a little, and I developed a range of online courses. And now a lot of my wisdom, if I have any, is in my online courses as well as in my books. So I blog a lot. On a typical day, I might blog, I might be active on social media. I've done a number of podcasts of my own as well as doing podcasts with other people. I like chatting about these issues. And then pottering around the house and tinkering on the piano and hitting a few tennis balls or golf balls.
Yeah, all of those, of course, the golf balls, the tennis and the pottering is brilliant for creative thinking. But
That's right.
we will get on to that very, very soon. So for those people who are listening in, and maybe lots of people have heard about the phrase lateral thinking, obviously associated with Edward de Bono, but what is it? What's your definition of lateral thinking, and why is it important, especially in business?
Well, lateral thinking is a technique whereby you approach a problem not head on, not directly, not the way you always do, but you deliberately come from the side. And lateral means thinking from the side, and that's what it's all about. And it's about using clever, different approaches, sidestepping the obvious and finding a new route forward. There's a story that Edward de Bono was consulted by Ford, and Ford said, "Can you help us because the competition keep copying whatever we do with our cars, our new cars. Vauxhall or Volkswagen or Peugeot will do something similar. We might put in anti-lock brakes or dual airbags. And what can we do to get a unique, sustainable, competitive advantage for Ford? And he went away and he came back to them and he said, I've got the answer. They said, great, what is it? He said, what you should do is you should go to every major town and city in this country, and you should buy a car park and make it available for drivers of Ford cars only. And it was too radical for them. They didn't do it. But it seems to me to be brilliantly lateral. The whole point is they were approaching the problem from the point of view of an automobile engineer, a Jeremy Clarkson, a petrol head, and they were thinking about performance and brake horsepower and acceleration. He approached it from the point of view of a little old man who wants to go shopping, and he's not interested in brake horsepower. He's interested in whether he can park when he gets to his destination. And if you made it easier to park wherever you went, that would be a powerful reason to have a Ford. So it's about taking a different point of view. If everyone else is looking this way, the lateral thinker looks this way, a different direction.
Yeah, and it's so important in business, isn't it? About competitive advantage and so on. And in your latest book, which is Lateral Thinking for Every Day, which is brilliant. I've got it in front of me, so I keep having a glance at my notes on the book. You talk about the dangers of conformity and fighting the menace of groupthink. So how do you firstly know? Because we don't know what we don't know, right? So how do we know when we are being conformist and when we are subject to groupthink? And then how do we get out of it? What are your tips for that?
Well, yes, there's quite a lot of in the book about that. And it is a real danger. And we see it time and time again. And when we look back in history, we can see that it was obvious that, when everyone supported slavery or everyone thought that homosexuals were committing a terrible crime or all of these things, we say, how could people have been so blind, so conforming to what was obviously an error of morality or ethics or judgment? And yet the same thing is happening today. And if you look from afar, if you look at American politics, you see there's two groups which are very bitterly partisan, and they won't allow for much compromise. They indulge in groupthink, and their tribe is right and the other tribe is wrong. And whatever the other tribe suggests, they have to shoot down because it's almost religious in its fervor. And the same happened here with Brexit and Remain, if you may remember. So people fall into groups, and in a group there's a very powerful tendency to conform. To not go against the grain, to not disagree, to not swim against the tide of the other people. It's a very powerful urge, and it leads to some bad decisions. Be on the guard against it. And there are various techniques you can use. A very good technique to use in meetings is 6 thinking hats, which is a de Bono technique, where you deliberately find fault with the idea, or you deliberately say what's good with the idea. Even if you hate the idea, think it's a terrible idea, wearing the yellow hat, you have to say what's good about it and the advantages and so on. Another thing is to challenge all the assumptions, even have somebody whose job it is to be devil's advocate. Just in the Catholic Church, when they're trying to see if someone's going to be a saint, one cardinal's appointed, one cleric, and whose job it is to argue against. So this is something that we need to be on the guard against. And a really good thing to do is to get very different sources of input. So if you normally read the Daily Telegraph, read the Guardian. If you normally read the Daily Mail, read Private Eye. If you normally watch BBC, watch Al Jazeera. And I'm not saying that one's right and the other's wrong, but they will give you a different perspective on issues and help you to see the other person's point of view and maybe come to a more nuanced judgment.
Yeah, I think that's such an important skill in the day and age that we are in, especially with social media, Google, so much being packaged and presented to us through algorithms. So yes, algorithms that determine our preferences. So
they know what you like and they feed you more of what you like. And of course,
which is reinforcing,
the internet, it should be a source of a diverse range of opinions, but people tend to operate in their own echo chambers with their own followers and their own groups who just repeat the same sort of things that they've said. So the internet is not a force for diversity, it's a force for conformity, it seems. Social media.
Yeah. So with awareness, of course, we can use it to our advantage
Yes.
and do it differently. But it's interesting. I think that fresh perspective. I mean, one example I'll often use is Uber. You know, Uber wasn't founded by some taxi drivers deciding that they could offer better customer service through technology.
No.
No, it was from outsiders looking into the industry, and I think that's so important, isn't it, for
Yes.
business success?
Well,
Yeah.
that's the whole point about lateral thinking. If you're going to innovate as an organization, there's two kinds of innovation, to oversimplify. One is incremental innovation, where you improve things. And most businesses and most managers are good at that. And the other is radical innovation, where you find a completely different way to do things. And most businesses and most managers are poor at that. And you can't incrementally innovate an aeroplane into a helicopter. You have to start again. And you can't incrementally innovate an aeroplane into a rocket. They're fundamental, and you can't incrementally increment a taxi company into Uber, because they don't own a single taxi. So you have to start again and completely reframe the problem.
So let's explore that a bit then, because there are people who come to work and don't appear to be creative, but they are very creative outside of work. And of course, there are people who come to work and they are very creative. So there's a mix. But what is it about work and creativity? What gets in the way of creative people at work?
Well, I'll tell you what gets in the way. There's one is busyness. So most people are very busy at work and they've got no time for experimentation or trying new things. I very often ask the question, what's impeding innovation in your organization today? And most people say we don't have the time to try new things. So we're working flat out. Everyone's working flat. Everyone in the NHS is working flat out. Everyone in big organizations, they're all working flat out, or so they think. Often doing low value tasks, but they don't have time to goof around and try something crazy. That's the first thing. The second one is fear of being ridiculed or criticized, or fear of failure. If you try something new and it doesn't work, people might point the finger at you and say, well, she was silly trying that. What a waste of money. I mean, anyone could see that wasn't going to work. That wasn't very clever of her, was it? And that sort of criticism, or fear of that criticism, is very powerful. And then the other thing is approvals. Just getting approval to try new things can often be very difficult, not worth the effort. And if you have to go and get approval from IT to develop a new app, or if you have to go and get approval from legal for a new form for customers, it's just a hassle. So regulation, approvals and regulation are difficult. And then many people are just risk averse, and they don't like change. And there are forces in organizations which are resistant to change.
And there are tips in your book, aren't there, about how to deal with. See, I've done my homework, Paul, about how to work with risk-averse people, how to influence for change. So, what are your top tips?
Well, there's a lot. I give a lot of talks. One talk I gave, somebody came up to me afterwards. He said, "Paul," he said, "I'm very creative. My boss doesn't like new ideas. What should I do?" And I thought, what should he do? And then I sat down and thought about it. I wrote a blog, and it had about 10 tips on what you should do if you're creative, but your boss doesn't want to hear your ideas. And the first thing is to don't go to him at the end of a busy day, he or she, at the end of a busy day, and say, look, I've got a great idea. What you should say is, have you got 10 minutes tomorrow morning, first thing, where we can talk about something which will be beneficial for the department, help you and help us, I think. And they'll probably say yes. Then you don't get them when they're all stressed out, because they'll just say no, it's not going to work. And then you might produce your idea, but you must align your idea with his or her objectives. So the corporate objectives, what we're trying to achieve as an organization is this. And it's very important that you understand your boss's objectives, what he or she is trying to achieve, what they're hot on. And if you can show that your idea would help them to achieve theirs, then that's a big, big plus. And depending upon sometimes you can sort of give them a half-formed idea and let them shape it so that they take ownership of it, and they then think it's their idea, which is a little bit frustrating, but it does get the thing is given birth. If they're very risk averse, point out the risks of not doing it. If we don't do this, there's a danger other departments will overtake us and we'll be left out in the cold. So if they're risk averse, emphasize the risks of not taking action, of standing still. So there are various things like that. You build a coalition of support before you go in. Even start doing it yourself and build a prototype and show them the prototype. And say, I've shown this to 1 or 2 customers and they love it. You know, I spoke to this. So anticipate their issues, and there's various techniques you can use. But if you're completely blocked and you're in an environment where there's no opportunity to try new things, then quit and work somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's the final piece of advice.
And I've done that previously before I started my company over a decade ago now. It was my third to last employer before I left, and I was working really hard to make money for them, which is what my job was, and they made it very difficult for me to make more money for them, you know. So
it's a common experience, I'm afraid.
Yeah, went somewhere else. But it's interesting as well, because sometimes I think we have great ideas, and the number of people who've got a great idea for a business or a great idea for a product or service, or to do something maybe for the community, and it always stays a good idea.
Yes.
So what's going on with that, and how can we use some of your lateral thinking, being open-minded, trying things, techniques to actually do something with? Can you imagine if there was a pile of all the good ideas that nobody had ever done anything with? It would be absolutely huge.
It would be huge. And of course, sometimes it's not the right time, and sometimes the technology isn't there, and sometimes you're just unlucky. I mean, a lot of being successful in terms of entrepreneurs and inventors is luck and timing, and knowing the right person at the right time. But there's a lot more advice on this subject now than there used to be. There's a very good book by Eric Ries called The Lean Startup. In there, he argues very strongly for a thing called the minimum viable product. And what he says is, once you've got a great idea, build the smallest, crappiest working version that you can, a model, a simulation of it, and show it to people and get their feedback, rather than build the whole product in secret. Which is what they did with the Segway, for instance. They kept it totally secret, and then they launched it, and it disappointed. Take out your early design and show it to people, even if it's a wireframe, even if it's just a series of mock-ups of screens, which the app will work like this. First, you'll see this screen, then you'll get, and there's nothing behind it. But people say, yes, I like that, but this is missing the mark. This isn't right. And rather than develop the wrong thing, you'll get that very useful early feedback. You have to choose the right customers to show it to. Positive forward thinkers, and you choose one, and they'll give you constructive feedback, and then you build a second version, you show that. So once again, it's not quite right, and so on, until you've got something that people really like. And then you've got to get some funding and some backing, and off you go.
Yeah, I mean, I have a philosophy in terms of some of the innovation projects that I work with clients on, which is we should always be in beta. Yes. So everything should always be in development, ready for the next version, because things are moving, whatever industry you're in, whatever sector.
You're in perpetual beta,
things are always moving, aren't they?
Yes.
So in your view, is everybody creative, Paul? Are some people more creative than others? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, often if I'm with an audience, I'll say, who here thinks they're creative? And you get a smattering of people. And I say, well, you're all in the creative industry now. Whatever business you're in, whatever your job title, you're actually in the creative industries. And if I said to you, who thinks they're musical? And you get a handful of people who are musical. And I say, right, if I offered you $50,000, if you come back in a week with a song that you had composed yourself, do you think you could do that? Any kind of song, doesn't have to be good. It has to be a song of some kind. You have to perform it. All right, you can get some help, but it's mainly your work. Could you do that for $50,000? Who thinks they could? Everyone raises their hand. Everyone. So we could all compose a song. We could all write a book. We could all write a story. We could all write a poem. We could all be creative. So some people are naturally much better than others. I mean, they're not all going to be Paul McCartney, are they? Let's face it. But it's the same with ideas. If you get a bunch of people in a room, some people will have lots of great ideas. Some people will very few, but they've all got ideas. And very often the quietest person in the room has some of the best ideas. So it's not the noisiest or the most dominant in the conversation who have the best idea. You have to find techniques to draw out the quieter people. But everyone was creative as a child, and everyone can be creative as an adult. It's just that the environment they're in, the culture of their organization, is not conducive to creativity.
Yeah, no, I agree. And sometimes we get, convention, what we're going to look like, are we going to look silly, putting out, and the psychological safety of all of that is important too, isn't it? So
yes,
I think there are some businesses that are, continue to do well in this tough economic climate that we're in at the moment, and some that are more challenged. What would you say to those businesses who are thinking, well, we're not going to innovate right now because actually, it's a harsh world out there economically, financially, from a growth perspective? What are your thoughts about innovating in difficult times?
Well, there's a lot of evidence that the most difficult times are the best times to start a new business. If you're in a things are going well, everyone's going well, it fools you. You think, I'm doing all the right things. When times are tough, you have to think very, very hard. And when times are tough, there are good people available, and there is office space available, and there is support people available, and there are opportunities. And it's a good time to try something new. And if your business is struggling, then I would still allocate a little bit of time for just brainstorming and thinking with the team. Take the team away one Wednesday afternoon and say, is there a better way to do what we're doing? What value are we really adding for customers? Is there a smarter way to solve this? What problem do we solve for customers? Is there a smarter way to solve that problem? And if you get your best people away and give them an environment in which they're free to come up with crazy ideas, typically you'll get some great ideas. And the people who are close to the action have seen things that you as the boss haven't seen or can't see. And they'll say, well, if we did this, I think customers would like it. And well, why did we never think of that before? So you have to cut people some slack. You have to find a little bit of time. And when they come up with a great idea, what you have to say is, I'd like you to build a prototype. I'd like you to build a minimum viable product. And they say, boss, I'm too busy. And you say, what can I take off you and give to someone else to free you up? How much time do you need? And he might say, well, I need 2 days a week for the next 3 weeks. I need some support from IT. All right, we'll try it and we'll see where it goes. And it might not work, but sometimes it does work. And when it does, it energizes the whole company. People see it and they think, wow, you can do things around here.
Yeah, it's about having a go, and from a financial perspective, don't risk more than you can afford to lose. But
that's right.
But see it as investment. It's R&D, and if it doesn't work the first time, with some tweaking, it might work. With some development or with some future things. I think I was reading somewhere that YouTube actually started as a dating site.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
Yeah. And I heard somebody speak about this. I was over in San Diego a couple of weeks ago, and that was the intention, was for people to meet each other, and that wasn't how people used YouTube. No. So YouTube flexed what it was doing to accommodate how people wanted to use it, rather than going against sort of the natural value proposition, I suppose. It's
often the way. You have to find out what customers are using your product for, and then repurpose it for that.
Yeah, and go with it, rather than necessarily shoehorn them into the thing that that was your original idea.
So there were some immigrants to the USA called the Jacuzzi brothers. They came from Italy, and they invented this form of bath that was very good for arthritis sufferers, and it was designed to help arthritis sufferers, and they put it on the market. And the arthritis sufferers couldn't afford it. They weren't selling very many. But after a while, they discovered the people who were buying it were very rich people who were using it to improve their social life, amongst other things. And they repositioned the jacuzzi as a luxury item for wealthy people, and it became a success.
I didn't know that. And
well, there are many examples like that.
Yeah, the hot tub was really, just came into its own, didn't it? I mean, I don't have one, but I know many people invested in hot tubs over lockdown and so on. One of my favourite chapters in your book is 10 things to do when you are stuck.
Oh, can't remember what they are now.
Yeah, no, they are
Tell me
great.
some of them. Tell things to do when you're... Yeah, we all get stuck.
Yeah, all of us, don't we? And then that means we procrastinate and we don't do stuff.
I'm as bad as anyone. I'm very good at giving advice. I'm not so good at taking my own advice, but I procrastinate, and I need deadlines, and I need sometimes a kick up the backside to keep me moving. And there's various techniques in the book, and even anything, the slightest thing can just get them into motion. If you can just do this, just write the heading to the chapter, write the first sentence, anything like that just gets you going, and things like that help.
Minimum viable product again, isn't it? What's
Yes,
the smallest thing you can commit to doing?
What's the smallest thing I can do here?
Yeah. But you've got identify what's stopping you, redefine your goal. I love the one about checking your assumptions, because sometimes when we're stuck, it's because we've got these sort of self-imposed constraints or limiting beliefs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, all successful people have enormous self-belief, and you have to build your self-belief. And a lot of people you meet, they lack self-belief and they hesitate. I'm no good at that. I'll never play tennis because I'm no good at balls. So I can't do any music. I can't, and they limit their achievements and possibilities because of the limited assumptions.
Yeah. So how do we challenge, or firstly, how do we surface those? How do we spot them? From an innovation and a business growth point of view, that we've got some assumptions here that are actually holding us back and therefore holding the business back. And then when we've spotted them, what do we do about them?
Well, we challenge them and we say, what if the opposite were true? What if that restriction wasn't there? What if I had unlimited funds? What if I had all the IT support? What would I do? How would things be different? And you just explore those things. And it helps if you've got a constructive outsider to bounce these ideas off and say, what assumptions are we making? Well, you're assuming that customers will only buy, this sort of thing. You're assuming that customers will only operate at weekend. You're assuming, and they'll challenge some of the assumptions that are holding you back and constraining your business or your project. And maybe those assumptions are sound, but sometimes they're not, and you have to rethink the whole thing.
Yeah, I like to ask people to think of a counter assumption that might just be as valid and true as the assumption they've got originally. Come up with the counter assumption is important. So, I think sometimes, and maybe this is your experience as well, there are senior managers, business leaders, business owners who are really up for innovation and genuinely want it. And there are those who do, but then when it comes to it, delay, dither, don't make decisions, and so on. So you've got a quiz about being open-minded.
Yes.
So I'd love to talk about that, because I think sometimes people think we're open-minded, but are we really?
Yeah, well, I did a TEDx talk on this. The title of my TEDx talk is, "Are you open-minded?"
We'll link to it, Paul.
Yeah, and we all think we're open-minded, but of course, we're all victims of our own constraints, and we're all in a straitjacket, in a framework which limits us. And I argue that you have to be quite deliberate about freeing yourself from the constraints of doing the same thing every day and thinking in the same way and making the same assumptions, speaking to the same people, doing the same thing, and deliberately try something new every day and introduce the random, introduce deliberate variation in order to try out new things and in order to experiment and just to see what might be true and what might not.
Yeah. The brain gets from a survival point of view, to keep us safe, but also from an energy consumption perspective, it likes us to keep doing the same thing, because that's easy and it hasn't killed us so far. So therefore it's okay. It's about just disrupting, creating new neural pathways, disrupting the habitual way of thinking, isn't it? Just
it is.
Small things.
And I would like to claim in this moment that my book will help you to do that. Lateral Thinking for Every Day has a lot of examples and stories to you really help with that. Yes.
Yeah, it's great. It's absolutely great. Some of the things I do is I write backwards with my left hand. I do mirror writing.
Do you? Wow.
You can try putting your socks on and, in a different order. You can brush your teeth with the opposite hand. There's lots of different things we can do, isn't there? Just to disrupt ourselves and not get too comfortable.
And it's quite difficult brushing your teeth with your other hand.
It is, isn't it? It's just if you want to do a good job. It is. You're also partial to metaphor, as am I. And a metaphor is a way of helping us think more creatively. So, how do you use metaphor?
Well, one of the exercises that I do actually with my workshops. It's called similes, not metaphors, because it's strictly in the form of a simile. So what you do is you have a problem, and here's the business problem, and instead of trying to solve the problem, what you say, who else has a similar problem in an entirely different walk of life? So who's got a problem that's loosely like ours, but they're in the military, or they're in a hospital, or they're in the arts, or they're in the clergy, or they're in a submarine, or in ancient history, or in sports, or something else. Who else has got the same sort of problem that we've got, but in a different field? And then how would they solve it? All right, what did they do? Well, the big retailers, they had this right there, and they did this, and the army, they did this, and so on. And then you say, which of those ideas can we take over from their environment and try in ours? And sometimes it works really, really well. And I've done it with a number of organizations, and we've taken ideas from elsewhere and used them.
Yeah, I agree. And when working with businesses, I'm really keen that we look for what's world class or best in sector, out of sector, because if you only look at what your competition are doing and in your direct industry are doing, then at best you'll only ever match them, usually be some sort of poor copy, unless you can do it a bit better. But by looking at what's going on completely outside and seeing what you can take and bring that in that the sector currently doesn't offer, I think is really important, isn't it?
It is.
And yeah, so thinking differently is super important. And do you facilitate groups as well? Do you do facilitation?
So I've done a lot of that, yes.
Yeah.
And one of my online courses is advanced brainstorm techniques, and I go through 14 different methods that I've used, and similes is one of them. And depending upon the problem and the group, I'll choose different methods. And my job is not to come up with ideas. My job is to displace people out of their comfort zone and force them to think in new ways. And there's lots of techniques you can use to do that. And generally speaking, we get some terrific ideas at the end of the day or end of the workshop. Yeah,
I mean, I also facilitate innovation sprints, events, workshops, and train facilitators to do the same. We've got a community of several hundred facilitators in the Facebook group, who many of whom will be listening to this podcast.
Good.
So what is your favorite little known, more unusual, more not off the shelf, something a bit quirky? What are your favorite techniques that you think, really these should be bigger than they should be bigger hits than they are?
Well, there's quite a number that I use. Have you ever tried splitting extroverts and introverts in a workshop?
Yes, I have, for a number of reasons.
I've done that, and it worked quite remarkably well. So I got the people to self-identify as extroverts or introverts, and most people are quite honest about that. And I put all the extroverts in a group and all the introverts in a group, and then we ran some brainstorming methods. And at the end of it, I said, how was it? And they both came up with good ideas. In fact, the extroverts came up with more ideas, but the introverts may have come up with better ideas. They considered them in more depth, probably. And I said, how was it? How did it compare to a normal brainstorm? And the extroverts said, it wasn't any different. It was just a normal brainstorm. And the introverts said, oh, it was very different. It was much better. We were dominated by the noisy people who normally run the whole conversation.
Space to think,
Yes, so they liked it, and it drew them out. So that's a good one. Another one, did you do yes but and yes and?
Yes. So and all the appreciative inquiry. In fact, I've got a video about that on YouTube, which I'll link to in the show notes, a video and a podcast. And I was talking to somebody about this the other day, and he hadn't realised once we'd pointed out as a group how many times he said yes but, and then it just stood out, hugely in flashing lights.
Isn't it?
How often do we say these things? But no, please go on. This language, because language really affects how well we create, doesn't it?
Yes. We do. I ran one for a local men's club, the 41 Club, and it was ideas to improve the club. And I said, right, you're not allowed. Everyone has to write down an idea. Any idea can be a crazy idea. And when you share it, no one's allowed to criticize it. Anyone who criticizes it has to buy a drink for everyone on the table. What you have to say is, yeah, you must start with these words, building on that. And so you take whatever the idea, and then you have to take it somewhere different, do something with it, improve it, make it different, better, and off they go. And one person's suggestion was, we should have a meeting where everyone has to tell us about their most embarrassing experience. And somebody said, well, building on that, we have a meeting where everyone has to say either the most embarrassing experience or the experience they were happiest at, proudest at. And we went around it with various people, and then one guy at the end said, building on that, everyone has to say their most embarrassing experience or their happiest experience and describe the woman who was involved. So it went around the table, and it's fun, and it just takes, and this concept of you take a crazy idea and then you take it in any direction, or even a bland idea, take it, is an interesting one. And rather than shoot down ideas or find fault with them, which is so easy, it's so easy to say, yes, but it won't, well, yes, but the customer, yes, but we can't afford it, yes, but it's just so easy to yes, but ideas.
It is, and the how the brain works is it dismisses all the things that go before the but. Yes. The sentence starts at but, doesn't it? And then we're into the negative. That's how we think.
It's like when somebody says, can I give you some feedback? Say, you were very good, and you're waiting for the but, aren't you?
Yes, yeah. And the but is, that's the but I love the I love the expression building on that. I think that's a really positive.
And they have to start. Everyone has to say building on that, and then they're building on that, and building. And if they're thinking, then you say, and build. How can you build on that, Charlie?
Yeah. You know, the questions we ask ourselves under each other, and the language that we use and how we phrase things either helps or closes down lateral thinking, doesn't it? So Indeed. Some of the questions you were saying, you know, great innovation questions, what if, building on that to move things forward, and yes and ideas, it really does matter how we speak. So what do you think about the language of businesses and the language of organizations, and how can leaders improve that and open up that communication to get that so much better?
Well, you have to look at the language you're using, and it's the trouble is we expect our leaders and our managers to be dynamic and decisive. And once they stand up and say, we've got to do this, and we have to do this, and we have to get this report in by Thursday, and you're in command and control mode.
Yeah,
you're bossing people around, and that's okay. It's in parent-child mode almost. And a better approach sometimes is to be much more open and say, how can we achieve that? What are we trying to achieve here? Is there a better way? What ideas have you got? And rather than start with your idea and your proposal, just talk about the problem and get underneath the problem, and then ask people for their ideas. And the manager, the most powerful person in the room, should hold back until so that people aren't influenced by his or her opinions early, and they should come in later when they've heard other people's input, I think.
Yeah, so it's almost you're right about the Disney technique, which is one I use as well, which is the dreamer, the realist.
Yes.
I call it the critic, and then the wise observer pulling it all together. Yes. So for those people listening who are new to that, you start off and saying, what's our big ambition here?
What are the dreams?
What are the dreams? Yeah.
Yes.
The realist is around. How would we make that work then? The critic is, well, let's risk assess all of this, a bit like the black hat in De Bono's 6 Thinking Hats, and then the wise observer puts the best from all of those other 3 perspectives together and comes up with a solution. So it's a bit like, taking it all in, hearing all those different perspectives, and in a genuinely unbiased way as well.
So I'd been running workshops for a number of years, and then a German client who I worked with, a big pharmaceutical company, said, Paul, can you come over and teach us the Disney method? And I said, yes, I can. I'd never heard of it. And I said, yeah, sure, I can. And I read up about it. I said, this is really good. I went over, and one of the best ways to learn something is to teach it, as you know.
Of course, yeah.
And I brought it back to the UK and found many people had never heard of it, didn't know about it. But it's a very useful technique, and I've used it on a number of occasions, and it works well.
It does work well. And I think people can remember the 3+1. I think with the 6 hats, which I love, the De Bono 6 Thinking Hats, sometimes people can get confused about which colour's which and lose the thread a little bit.
It needs to be well facilitated, but it works remarkably well, I find, Six Thinking Hats, especially if you've got a contentious issue with people for and against, and strong emotions and strong feelings. And instead of having the adversarial discussion that you normally have, where the head of marketing and the head of sales go up against each other because they don't like each other and they don't want to acknowledge the other one's got a better idea, it diffuses all of that, and they've both got to say what's good about it, and they've both got to say what's bad about it at the same time, and it helps you shape and you get much more progress much more quickly with that method.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure you do the same. I run it in a couple of ways, which is either we're all the same, everybody's the same hat at the same time, and then everybody swaps perspectives, or people can adopt different hats in the same group. So we've got a diverse.
Yes, well, I think if everyone's wearing different hats, you're back to a normal meeting, I think, pretty much.
Yes, but at least there's an awareness.
There's an awareness.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is,
I like to do it where they all have to do the same hat at the same time, and I'd always do it the same sequence. I always do white, and then red, and then yellow, and then black, and then green, and then blue.
Right, that's your. It depends what I'm doing and why, and what the purpose is. But I really enjoy it when people adopt a hat which isn't their norm, which naturally they don't find easy. You know, and it really makes them think about how they normally operate, how they normally communicate and contribute.
Well, there's a lot of people around who are just black hat thinkers. They're always good at finding fault with things, and even they can see it then, because they're forced to wear the yellow hat. And the red hat is a very interesting hat where people talk about their feelings, because in business meetings we tend not to talk about feelings, and men think it's a sign of weakness to talk about feelings, but feelings are very important. Feelings underpin most decisions. That, you know, the SNP argument for independence is all based on emotion and feelings. Brexit was largely driven by emotion rather than logic, and feelings are important. And if you get everyone to articulate their feelings and express them early, I feel threatened by this idea. I feel excited by this idea. I feel nervous about it. It's cathartic. It gets it out there. And then you can be much more calm in the discussion. Absolutely.
Our behaviours, decisions, actions are driven by emotion and post-rationalised with logic.
That's right. Exactly right.
Yeah. And and it's all driven by how we want to feel, isn't it?
Yes.
And that's a huge influence. So I think it's actually really healthy to surface that as well. Yes. So now, one of your other books is about and you've got 20, so we won't cover all of them, but I love the title of this. It's about having a brilliant brain. So how can, on top of the tips you've already given us, how do you think business leaders can have an even more brilliant brain?
Well, in my course, it's called How to Be a Brilliant Thinker, and it's a book which has done pretty well, and I've just done an online course of it on Udemy called How to Be a Brilliant Thinker. And what I argue is that no matter how good a thinker you are today, you can be a better thinker. And that's because most people think in only one or two different styles. And most people think with words rather than pictures, or rather than numbers, or rather than similes or metaphors. And if you can use different thinking styles, you can be much more effective. And the analogy I use is, if you think of a tennis player he's got a very good forehand. He stands on the baseline, he whacks the ball with his forehand, and he runs around and he hits on the back, he'll hit his forehand, and he'll do pretty well, but he'll never be a great tennis player, because to be a great tennis player, he has to learn how to play a backhand, how to play a lob, how to do a drop shot, how to come to the net, how to volley, and he has to get all of those aspects of his game up to standard, and then his forehand will still be very strong. But typically we use critical thinking or logical thinking, and there used to be this idea that there was a left brain and the right brain, and the left brain was all analytical and numerical, judgmental, and the right brain was creative and imaginative and intuition, and you were either left brain or right brain. And neuroscientists now say that it's not strictly true. You don't use the two halves of the brain, but the metaphor, the idea itself is still powerful, because most people do think in one mode or the other mode, and you get most people at work are very rational, logical, analytical, and critical of ideas. And then you get some other people who are known as ideas people, and they come up with all sorts of wacky, crazy ideas, not grounded particularly in reality or what we can do. And you would traditionally have said they're the right brain kind of people, and they might be musicians or artists in their spare time as well. So what I argue in my book and on the course is that you can develop different styles of thinking, and you should self-assess. There are a number of places on the internet where you can assess your thinking styles. I list some of them on the course where you can do a self-assessment. It will tell you, it's not absolutely scientific and precise, but it will give you an indication of your natural thinking style. And then I recommend that you develop additional thinking styles. If you're no good at maths, you need to develop a little bit of maths and probability and statistics. If you're thinking, I talk about parallel thinking, thinking in combinations, thinking visually, thinking mathematically, the power of pondering, emotional intelligence, all of these different things you can use. Then I talk about the tools that you can use, such as problem analysis tools, memory tools, parallel thinking tools like 6 Hats, and so on, that you can use to do this. And I give some little exercises on the course and in the book to help you do that. So I think everyone can be a better thinker by developing more thinking styles. And, if you wanted to improve your tennis, you might go to the tennis coach. You say, I want a lesson on my backhand this week because it's very weak. And your coach will do it. Nobody ever goes to a thinking coach and says, I need to develop my lateral thinking because I'm too much of a critical thinker. I'm too logical. And yet thinking is more important than tennis. We use thinking all the time, especially senior people. And yet nobody ever says, I need to improve my thinking styles. I should go to a thinking coach. Well, in a sense, this book and this course is your thinking coach.
Okay, well, we will put a link to that in the show notes as well.
Please.
So people watching and listening can access that and find out more about it. And I agree with you. On the one hand, I'm of the opinion that you can hold two apparently opposite truths, and that's okay. So on the one hand, I'm a really big believer in playing to strengths. I think there's a lot of evidence to show that we do better, we're happier, we're healthier, we contribute more when we play to strengths. But at the same time, it's also about developing in a more rounded way.
Yes.
I think a lot of people get out of developing themselves or having to make the effort to learn things because they go, well, this is how I am, this is how I'm made. And actually a lot of what we do and how we behave is learned behavior, isn't it? It's habits. And
it's what we're comfortable. We settle into the mode in which we're comfortable and where there's least resistance. It works. And I can play really good shots with my forehand, so I'll run around and hit every shot with the forehand. It seems to work. What's the problem? But you'll never really develop fully. But you're right. And even the good tennis player, his forehand might be better than his backhand, even when he's the Roger Federer or Rafael Nadal. But I think you play to your strengths, but you should be aware of your weaknesses and do something about them. Yeah,
because your strengths are great while they work for you, and until they don't, and then it's about having something else in your, a more rounded toolkit, isn't it? As well. So, in terms of people making the most of the brains that they've got in the team as well. Just some final thoughts in terms of leveraging the creative wisdom from the team and having diverse teams and getting the best out of the creative tension that comes from that as a leader.
Yes. Well, there's a lot spoken about diversity these days. And I said on one of my workshops, I said, brainstorming and ideation sessions where diversity really pays, one of the areas where diversity really pays off, or any kind of ideas meeting, it's good to have young and old, experienced and fresh into the company, men and women, people from different departments, because they've all got different perspectives, and those perspectives are very valuable. Have you read the book by Matthew Syed called Rebel Ideas?
I have, yes.
It's very good. And the first chapter in that is very powerful. And it's about conformity, and it's about the CIA and how they recruited the absolute top graduates from Stanford and MIT and Harvard and Yale. And the trouble was they all thought the same way. They were all white, highly educated, men and women, and they just couldn't conceive that a man in a cave, Osama bin Laden, could come up with a plot like 9/11. It just wasn't on their radar at all. And they had very few Arabic speakers, very, very few people with any kind of real understanding of the Middle East and Arab cultures. And so, although they had a terrific team, it lacked diversity, and there were no rebel ideas in there. And the whole book is full of great stories like that. So in a brain, you should encourage diversity, and if necessary, introduce some external people. And I've run brainstorms where we've had an external customer in, or just an outsider, somebody who is very different and thinks differently. And one of my clients, a big engineering company, they sponsor the Halle Orchestra in Manchester, and they bring in a conductor or the lead violinist. They're talking about management problems. They'll say, how do you face that? How do you do this in the orchestra? It's a bit like the similes thing, but they actually bring somebody in. And so when we have this sort of problem, we do that. Oh, really? That's interesting. So diversity really pays off, and the manager, the leader, can encourage that, and can encourage people to contribute, and can encourage the quietest, most introverted people to contribute. And there are techniques to do that. The nominal method's very good, where people write down ideas and pass the parcels. Another one where people have to start with a really crazy idea, then you pass it round and you make it creative rather than ludicrous. So there are techniques you can use which overcome the issue of the big beast in the room who dominates the discussion. But it's a challenge. And the trouble is, if you're a real dominant thinker, it's hard for you to stop yourself from launching in and saying, great idea, Mary. Oh, that won't work, Edward. But and that you're showing favoritism all the way through, and your own judgment dominates. So I did a workshop with a big engineering company on the south coast of England, and we started with what's the problem here. One of them was authoritarian leadership, and the MD was in the room, and he knew it, and he absented himself when it came to the discussion. He left, and we came up with a lot of great ideas. He came back at the end of the day, and we said, these are the ideas for improvement. He said, terrific, that's great, I love that. But if he'd been in the room, he couldn't have stopped himself from launching in. But he was smart enough to know that he was the problem.
And went away. I think that's something I really, when working with organisations, excuse me, to speak to clients about in advance, is that if I'm going to have the leaders in the room, it's about them listening more than that, still contributing.
Yes.
But unless it's a particular innovation sprint where there is a role for a decision maker, the hierarchy goes flat while we're in the room, and they're part of it just like everybody else. I also get sometimes leaders saying, well, the thing is, they won't open up if I'm there. And I'm saying, well, how on earth are they going to ever open up when you're there, unless they have the opportunity to have exposure to you? And when better to have exposure, what better time than when you've got a professional facilitator in the room that can help get that going for you. So it is about working with people's awareness, and leaders doing the right thing and knowing themselves and being open to doing that to make it successul. We could talk for a very long time about all sorts of things.
The problem is we keep agreeing with each other, Jo.
We do, don't we? We need a wild card. We need a point
of contention. The other thing about teams is that there's research that shows teams that get on really well together are less creative than teams where there's some tension. And in your group, a lot of managers hire for conformity. They say, I want someone who will fit in with the team. And you don't want that. You don't want everyone the same, just like in the CIA. You want some grit in the oyster. You don't want a destructive tendency in the team, but you want some constructive dissent. You want some constructive contention of ideas, so that people don't all say, that's a great idea, Joe, and we're all going to do that, we're all behind. You want some degree of support and some degree of challenge. So you want a diverse team, and you want diverse sets of views if you can.
High daring, high caring.
Yes.
It's that sort of quadrant everything in life can be drawn on 2x2.
Yeah.
a four box matrix or grid.
Everything.
Get everything on two axes. It always works. But yeah, so high daring, high caring, high challenge, high support.
Yes.
And I think it's about them. It's okay for people not to see eye to eye on how things should be done, as long as at least there's a shared set of values and people are working towards the same objective.
Exactly right. If we've got the same goal, but we've got different opinions of how to get there, that's fine. If we've got different goals, that's not so good.
Yeah. And that needs to be in an environment where I'm okay and you're okay and we know each other's okay. So therefore we can have that disagreement. Right. You know, it's just part of how we operate, and then we go and have a cup of tea. I quite like Jeff Bezos' expression, which is disagree and commit.
Yes.
So we have full and frank conversation, disagreement when we're, in the session together as a team. Once we've made the decision, even if it wasn't your first choice of decision, as soon as we come out of here, we're all in it together and we're all committed.
Yeah,
what
I say is, do we want alignment? And people say, well, I want alignment in the team. And once the decision is made to go ahead, you want alignment. Everyone behind it, everyone trying to make it work. Then after a while, you sit down and say, is it working? Well, to be honest, boss, it's this area is not. And then you think about it and you might change. You might change a whole bunch of things. Once we've made that decision, even the people that disagree with it, we're aligned. We're all going to try and make this new approach work. And you try and then you sit down and you get, so it's like convergent and divergent thinking. So at the meeting, you have divergent thinking, but once we agree, we converge and we're all aligned on the goal. But you flip-flop between the two modes. You're not in total alignment all the time. Otherwise, there's no scope for disagreement.
Yeah, you've got to come together when that decision is made, and everybody get behind it to do it right. Because sometimes great decisions can be undermined by poor implementation, and people who aren't fully committed to making it work. So that's super important. So Paul, you've got the courses which we will link to in the show notes, and also your books and so on. I'm sure there are people who would love to connect with you and hear more from you, and see. I know you did an audio
event on
show.
LinkedIn, yes.
Yeah, on LinkedIn, didn't you?
So that's another innovation I'm trying. Yes, audio events.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. So how can people connect with you and find out more about you?
So I'm on Twitter. I'm quite active on Twitter. I've got 40-something thousand followers on Twitter at Paul Sloane, PaulSloane. I'm on LinkedIn. I've got 8,000 first level connections, and I'm happy to connect with you. I've got my own group on there, Lateral Thinking in Business, which you can post on and join. Those are the two main ways, I would say. And I'm on YouTube. I've got quite a number of videos on YouTube. You can see me there. So please get in touch, and you search for my courses on Udemy or my books on Amazon.
Fantastic, thank you. And the books are great, and we'll link to the TED Talk as well that you mentioned. Well, Paul, that's amazing. Thank you. I feel inspired and energized to go out and be even more creative, and I'm sure everyone listening is feeling the same as well. So, Paul, thank you very much indeed.
I really enjoyed it, Jo. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Idea Time Show, brought to you by Dr. Jo North. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and access more completely free resources at bigbangpartnership.co.uk/resources. We'll see you next time.